I'm Tom, and this is Tom in His Car Talks About Tech. So this is a new podcast that I'm launching, and the concept is literally I'm in my car. You can probably hear my turn signals going, and not making this up. I genuinely am in my car driving around, and I'm going to talk about different tech-related topics while driving around. I'm doing it hands-free, so I probably won't crash into anything. And why take this format? Why do it in this way? You know, I think tech gets really complex. It's sometimes really hard to understand, and you know, sometimes there's a lot to unpack with a tech topic. There's political implications, there's the technical aspects alone. Sometimes that can seem intimidating, and I think the car is a venue where people can have a pretty informal, casual conversation about a topic. And I just sort of imagine if somebody asked me, what is blank? And I tried to just explain that to them. And just driving along, talking with people, I think that's a really conducive format to getting into these complex topics and starting to really unpack them. And that's what I hope to do. And again, this is going to be extremely informal. I'll probably stop talking if I'm trying to make a particularly difficult turn or merge, and you're going to hear car sounds and stuff, because genuinely here we are driving along in my car talking about tech. So first, who am I? My name is Thomas Smith. I'm a technologist. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Gatto Images. We're an AI-driven company based in San Francisco. We do work with our archives and photography. But I also write for several tech publications, for 10, for The Startup, and I have a YouTube channel where I go into home automation topics, and I do a lot of research and consulting as well. I speak about tech, I talk about privacy and issues around privacy and technology. So really I would call myself an entrepreneur and technologist overall. My background also, I have a degree in neuroscience, cognitive science, the focus in neuroscience from Johns Hopkins University, and also a degree in cultural anthropology. So I'm very interested in the intersection of technology and sort of human issues too. So what are we talking about today? I'm going to start out talking about Clearview AI. And this is a tech company that you've probably never heard of, but they've definitely heard of you. And that's definitely a problem. So what is Clearview? They're a facial recognition company. And really they were operating in the shadows almost exclusively until January of this year of 2020. And a major expose in the New York Times brought out who they are and what they've been doing. And they said that this company, Clearview AI, could end privacy as we know it. The New York Times is, usually not an organization. It's not a tabloid or something. You don't think of it as being very prone to hyperbole. So if they say that a company is going to end privacy as we know it, you can probably assume that that's something you should take seriously. So why do they think that Clearview AI is going to end privacy as we know it? So basically what Clearview does is to go around the internet and to pull down as many images as they can of people. And they get these from basically everywhere, from Facebook, from Twitter, from people's personal blogs. If you had an article about you published in your college's alumni magazine, they're going to pull that down. They find things that you post to a Nextdoor post, or that you might put onto a Meetup profile, anything on the internet where you posted a photo publicly. They're going around and pulling all of those photos down from these different sources, possibly unlawfully. That's one of the arguments against them, one of the things that started to come out, but we'll get into that in a minute. So they pull down all these photos specifically of people is what they're looking for. And then they run all of that through a facial recognition system. And they're pulling out all of the faces in these photos. And then they're clumping all of those together, and they're creating profiles of every single person who has a public photo on the internet. And how many photos have they done? As of January, when the New York Times ran its story, they had actually accessed and added 3.8 billion photos, billion with a B, to their library. So a huge cross-section of what's been posted publicly on the internet. Again, social media, personal blogs, basically anything that they can get their hands on, they're pulling down and running through this facial recognition system. They're recognizing the people, and they're clustering all of this together into these chunks by people's faces. and some people call it a face print. It's like a thumbprint or a fingerprint, but for your face. So what are they doing with this once they have it? Basically, they're selling it, and specifically they're selling it to private companies, to government agencies, and to law enforcement. And they're using this database to allow law enforcement and these agencies to be able to actually search for you or anybody else using only a picture of your face. So if they have you in their database, and anybody has a picture of your face from any source with no other identifying information, they can put that into their system, and they can find all the other pictures of your face that they've pulled down from your Facebook profile, from your personal blog, from wherever it's been featured online, and they can actually find you, and in most cases find out your identity, again using just a picture of your face. And the New York Times delved into this a bit and found that they were doing things like developing code where they can embed this into glasses. So imagine a police officer walking around a city, and every person they passed by, they were wearing a special pair of augmented reality glasses, and the person's name and identity, and maybe an arrest history or something like that, was appearing as a little blurb above their head. So that's the sort of reality that Clearview is trying to create. And even just, beyond that, it's been used in retail, for example, to identify who customers are and try to build profiles. I think Macy's is one of the companies that it came out was potentially using Clearview's services. So, normally if you were to try to find somebody based on their photo, it would be pretty challenging to do that. And even if somebody found a picture of you online, if there wasn't any other identifying information, previously it would have been pretty tricky to figure out who you are. Now that's no longer the case, and that's why the New York Times says that they could end privacy as we know it. So how do I know that this actually works and it's actually effective? Well, I live in California, and there's a new law in California called the California Consumer Privacy Act. It went into effect on January 1st of 2020. It's going to begin to be enforced in July of this year. And basically requires large companies like Clearview to disclose to consumers who live in California and make a request under the law the data that they've gathered on the consumer. And before, Clearview could basically act in the shadows. When the New York Times did their investigation, they actually had to work with law enforcement who had access to Clearview in order to be able to even run searches and see what they were up to. But now, because of CCPA in California, any consumer in the state can actually make a request, and Clearview is required to hand over the data they've gathered. So I actually went ahead and did that. And the way that they have you do it, you have to prove your identity, and then you send in a picture that they use to do a search against their database, just like if a law enforcement agency had sent them a picture to do a search. So I chose one that was just a picture of me making latkes, just something I'd post to social media. I didn't want to do like a close-up of my face or one that had been, shot professionally or well lit or anything. I just wanted to show what was possible with a kind of random photo of a person you might find posted online, or somebody might even take deliberately to try to figure out who they are in a crowd. And I gave that to Clearview along with my information about my identity. I had to stay on them. It took about 2 months, but ultimately I got them to actually give me the information that they had on me in their database. And it was pretty shocking, pretty terrifying to figure out what they had on me. And it was everything. They had my Facebook profile, so they could see who I was. They could see who some of my family members were and see anything I had posted publicly on my Facebook profile. They had, again, articles about me in my school's alumni magazine, so they could find out from that who my faculty advisor was and what line of work I'm in. They had an old Meetup profile that I had created when I first moved to the Bay Area, which again reveals the name of my company and the line of work that I'm in. They had, information on, again, people I knew, some of my family. They had a personal blog I had started about a decade ago. They had pulled up a bunch of posts from that happened to have my face. So again, using one kind of low quality amateur cell phone photo like I would post to social media, they were able to learn who I was, where I lived, who I'm associated with, the name of my company, basically everything that you would want to know about a person you are investigating. I'm recording this and providing it to you through a service called Anchor. And this is something that actually I learned about from a friend who has a new and much more polished podcast than this one. And it's a really great way to publish podcasts. It kind of feels like Medium or something like that, but for podcasting. It's a great way to get into this format. It's free. There's tools you can use on your phone where you can edit and put your podcast together. And they'll go ahead and distribute it to you to things like Spotify and really anywhere people listen to podcasts. Apple Podcasts, that kind of thing. So you don't have to do the work of putting it out there. And then you can actually monetize it, again, kind of in a similar way to how you might monetize blog posts with ads. And they put in sponsored messages. And you can actually, they'll find sponsors for you, so you can do that pretty readily. And sort of a one-stop shop of a place to go and make a podcast. So that's why I'm using that service here and experimenting with it. And if you want to try it out, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm. And it was really almost, I think, it took 2 months to get them to run the search. Just from the timing of emails and what I was able to learn from New York Times, it probably only took a second or two to actually do the search once they decided they would go ahead and do it. So, kind of a scary capability that a company can take a photo of you and, in a few seconds be able to find out who you are and pretty much everything about you. And that's, again, why Clearview is something that the New York Times thought was so scary and that everybody should know about. So what can they actually do with this? I mean, why is that scary? If somebody can identify you based just on your photo, probably in most cases there's going to be other identifying information about you out there. So what's the significance of this? Well, I mean, for one thing, if you're seen by law enforcement and somebody takes a picture of you, they can immediately know who you are and trace that back and be able to investigate you if they wanted to. There's a lot of evidence that government agencies are actually taking people's photos during protests, and then potentially they're building databases of all the people who might show up to a protest to address a particular issue. And there's been reports especially of this happening around the White House, other sensitive areas that protesters are getting kicked out of. And obviously that can be very concerning. If you show up to a protest and you're expecting to be anonymous, if anyone's able to snap your photo, then authorities could instantly know you were there and start to see which other protests you've attended and basically build a profile on you just based on having a picture of you there. And they don't even have to be there necessarily to do this. People post hundreds, thousands of photos from protests, and those could easily be run through Clearview's system and pull out all the people in there, identify them, start to build databases of who's been where. You can see, how very quickly this can become a concerning technology from a standpoint of privacy. You have to trust that those authorities are doing this kind of thing for the right reason. And it's also concerning for certain classes of people that need to be anonymous and need to be able to disappear. So an example is somebody who's been the victim of abuse and they're hiding and trying to obscure their identity or start a new life. If you can just take a picture of it on social media, scan through and find somebody, you can change your name, you can change your location. You can go into a program like witness protection, but it's very hard to change your face in a way that obscures it from facial recognition. And so, for people who need to be able to disappear for their own safety, this makes it pretty much impossible for them to do that. So, it's a very concerning technology for a lot of reasons. Those are a couple of them. There's benefits too. It's not something that's all costs. One of the things that Clearview has been used to do, aside from just solving crimes where maybe there's a surveillance video and it's not possible to identify the person through normal methods, it's been used for that kind of thing, but it's also been used for cases like child sexual abuse. So if there's a photo of abuse or something like that, law enforcement can use that to track down an abuser, and they've actually made arrests based on that. So there's a benefit to these systems, but there's also a really concerning set of privacy issues where basically anybody out there could be identified. And particularly when it moves beyond government agencies, it gets even more concerning. So imagine, you're having a conversation in a public cafe and you're talking about something embarrassing with a friend. Somebody videotapes the conversation. They could run that through Clearview, find out who both of you are, and then reach out and blackmail you and say, I'm going to post this online along with your identity and tag you in your social media and spread it to your friends unless you pay me X amount of money. So before, the anonymity that we all kind of enjoy with strangers anyway in a public setting, with something like Clearview, that would no longer exist. So, not all costs, but certainly some really concerning kinds of privacy issues there. And I mean, one of the things that's scary about this system is that it's really not that challenging to build something like Clearview. You're talking about off-the-shelf products, really. Web scraping, facial recognition. It's complex. Obviously, managing 3.8 billion images is complex, but it's really more that they had the chutzpah to go ahead and do this. Most other companies that could do it, like Google and IBM, at least publicly, they're saying that they're not doing it. And it's sort of a handshake agreement in the industry not to do what Clearview has gone ahead and done, which is to build a general facial recognition database on literally everybody. So what's happening with Clearview? I mean, they're probably getting a lot more business out of everything going on in the world right now, but they're also getting a lot more pushback. So at least one senator has kind of made it their life's mission to take down Clearview, or at least look into them a lot more. So that's one step, and they've been starting to try to figure out what they've been up to. They're asking questions, and I'm asking too, of, are they gathering data on minors, for example? In many cases, that would be a violation of laws like the CCPA. So there's an investigation coming there on the legislative side. And then, there's just, I think, more of a public outcry, a public recognition that this kind of thing is happening. I think with Black Lives Matter and with all the protests, especially as there's these facial databases being built, you're probably going to see more of that. But the biggest thing, I think, is a new lawsuit from the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, against Clearview. It's a class action. It was just filed about a week ago when I'm making this recording. And basically it says that they've been violating a Illinois law about using people's biometric information, which includes their face print, without their permission. And each violation there is, I think, a $5,000 fine or something. So if they're able to prove that in their lawsuit, that could be basically something that would make it not financially reasonable to do this. Part of the challenge for Clearview is that they're not really doing a lot, or in theory anyway, they're not doing a lot of processing of the images other than generating the face prints. So figuring out who lives in Illinois and excluding those people would be almost impossible, or at least it would make their model a lot harder. And even one thing I'm wondering is, how do they exclude minors? Are they looking at people's faces and trying to judge their age using software, which is possible but not always super accurate? So how are they avoiding including pictures of kids and that kind of thing in their database? So the ACLU's case is probably the biggest thing that will potentially change Clearview's ability to do business. And one thing I also would point out is that they're pulling down all of these images from services like Facebook and Twitter, and those services have come out and said this is totally against our terms of service. You can't do this. You can't just pull down our users' data and process it. So I think there's copyright concerns around that. There's just accessing systems they're maybe not authorized to access to pull in a lot of this data. So there's really a lot of different arguments mounting against Clearview at this point. But again, there are some things that are good about it and helpful about it. So kind of begs the question, well, how do you preserve those helpful aspects? Like obviously catching child predators is very important. while also protecting people's privacy and ensuring that we don't end up with a mass surveillance kind of situation, like building a face database of every single person involved in protests for no other reason than intelligence gathering or just knowing who was there. So, I mean, what I think should probably happen is to somehow integrate this into the same procedures around search and seizure in general. Just like people can't come into your house from a law enforcement agency and search your home without getting a warrant, why not extend that same type of constitutional procedure to doing searches with Clearview? So you could still preserve the ability to search for a suspect from a surveillance video, or, to try to track down these really aberrant crimes that Clearview is working on, but with some oversight and the same oversight that would be applied to any other kind of fairly invasive search of somebody's personal information. It still doesn't get around the fact that to have a useful database, they have to be building all of these in the first place. There's concerns about data breaches. People could get in, be able to look up, for example, a victim of a sexual assault and track them down and perpetuate that assault further. So there's a lot of concerns around that, and those are some of the things that the ACLU is addressing in their lawsuit against Clearview. But, I think the bottom line is that from a technical perspective, what they're doing is not necessarily something that again, that's very groundbreaking. It's more that they just decided to do it. And so from a technical standpoint, it's fairly hard to defeat something like that. It really has to happen from a legislative or a lawmaking standpoint. So I think the ACLU's case will be helpful in that it's a civil case and it could make it financially untenable to do this kind of thing. But if it sets a legal precedent for applications of privacy laws like the one in Illinois to companies like Clearview, it might make it impossible for them to gather all of this facial data. And already we've seen other laws start to come out to prevent these kinds of practices. So San Francisco, for example, has banned police agencies from using facial recognition for these kinds of purposes. And the state of New Jersey specifically banned Clearview's products, so none of their law enforcement can use Clearview's products. I think ultimately, again, if there's an ability to do this in a way that respects privacy and respects constitutional liberties, and maybe that is part of that is allowing people to opt out. They don't want their face to be included in the system. It's a very powerful and in some cases helpful capability. And, more to the point, even if someone shuts Clearview down, unless there's clear legislation saying when this can and can't be used, what kinds of searches can be performed, how you can and can't gather this type of data, someone else is just going to pop up and offer the same service because it's fairly easy, quote unquote, easy to do it technically. So really, I think what we have to hope for as consumers is better legislation around the use of facial data. And that could be local, like the laws we've seen in San Francisco and in New Jersey, or it could be a national law that something will eventually come down the line. And the other thing I would say is in the short term, what can we do as consumers? We can go, if we have the ability in our own state or jurisdiction, and request the data that these kinds of companies like Clearview have gathered about us. So if you live in California, you can do exactly what I did, just reach out to Clearview, make a CCPA request, and in a timely manner, they're required to provide your own profile. And you can see firsthand what they've gathered, and that might be motivation to go and have them remove that, which is one of your rights also under CCPA, or to just be a little bit more mindful, I guess, about what you're posting publicly online. So I think a lot of it is, we can advocate for legislation, but we can also take things into our own hands if we live in a jurisdiction that's given us the tools to do that, and learn what these companies have gathered about us. And if we don't live in these jurisdictions, then it's a reason to reach out to your representatives and say, I want something like CCPA to be applied in my own state, and to advocate for that. So that's an overview of what Clearview is, why it's important, why, as the New York Times said, it could end privacy as we know it, and as a consumer, some steps you can take to either find out what they may or may not know about you, and also just to advocate for how this kind of data gathering should be done in the future, because even if Clearview goes away, it's still going to be another one. And we should preserve the positive elements of this while really protecting ourselves and protecting our privacy. If you found this to be helpful or interesting in any way, please subscribe to my podcast, share it, and I'll do future episodes about other tech concepts right here from my car.